All right, and I will keep an eye on the participants list if we get some more people that show up. But we are recording now, and I'm going to. I've got a link to your book, a bookstore link through Bookshop. I'm going to put into the comments section. So let me do that here in my first opportunity. There we go. There. So now, if anybody wants to order your book, they have the opportunity. Uh, I've been sort of vignetting on my camera lens, but I think I can prevent that from being too much trouble. How are you?
I am well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm cold. It's a cold day outside, but I guess we just have to learn to live with that.
Yeah, it's a good day to be inside with poetry.
Exactly. Um, well, I have been wanting to talk to you about your book of poems called Follow, which I've got here beside me and highly recommend to anybody who's a fan of poetry and a lover of poetry. Thanks so much for coming on and chatting with me about it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This will be fun.
I think so. So, could you tell our viewers and listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into poetry writing and where what's the place of that in your life and maybe a little background?
Sure. Um, well, I kind of view being an Ozarks poet as being part of a bigger picture, which is more like being an Appalachian poet, I should say. My dad's family came the Virginia, Kentucky, eventually Southern Illinois Ozarks route and settled there. And that took a lot of generations and I guess a lot of folk songs to cheer them up through that passage over the years. But they got as far as Southern Illinois, and then I've come on west. So I feel like that's all part of the same kind of journey. I lived in Texas for a little while, but I felt pretty lost in that landscape. So this is my home place, and I'm sticking with it. um,
Oh, great. And you're in the Springfield area now, right?
I am, I am outside Springfield, a little bit to the south.
Okay.
So yeah, just kind of out on a ridge with lots of
And
woods around.
and have you been writing poetry pretty much all your life, or is it something you came to later, or
I
what's
have
the
been
story
writing,
there?
yeah, I have been writing since I was quite little. And in my family, well, I got to go back. I got to be real Appalachian here and go back a few generations. Um, I'm really lucky in that I come from a family that's Appalachian, but we value literacy really highly. The people in my family couldn't always get schooling reliably, but if you learned to read, you had books and you read for life. And so that was the attitude. My great grandma in Kentucky was like the only person in her community who could read. And so she entertained people on her porch steps telling stories based on books that she was reading. And everybody came out and listened. And so she was held up as a hero for me. And we also had the music aspect in our lives. And uh, that was something you got from people you knew in the Illinois Ozarks. My granny learned piano and violin from an old guy named Uncle Mac Bond. He was blind, no relation, but he lived with the family and traded music lessons for the kids for that. So that was how the music and the lyrical bit came in for me. And then my dad was able to go to college. He worked for the general store. They decided to send him to college, and he went to SIU Carbondale and got out of poverty, basically. But the cool thing is that he felt like you don't leave it behind, everything that's good, you bring that along. You leave the maybe the abject poverty and not going to the dentist behind, but you bring along the gardening and the relationship to the land. So I can make sassafras tea and I can do these things because the family taught me how to do it. But I also went to college. So as far as me writing, I have been writing since a very little kid. And my dad always encouraged that. And so did my mom. And I think that growing up in a subdivision and having a big, deep wooded ravine behind it and getting to explore that with my friends made it possible for me to fall in love with just the experience of being outside, taking a notebook with me all the time, and just kind of writing down what I saw, what I observed, and making it sing a little. So that's how I got into it.
Okay, well, wonderful. I do note that the poems in Follow are, for the most part, what we would just sort of loosely call nature poems, or you know, certainly nature is highly um, present in your poetry, basically on in every one. There's lots of close observation, um, sort of journey poems where you go out into a particular location and those kinds of experiences. So uh, it seems to me anyway, it seems like that is really kind of at the center of your of what you look for and what you write about.
Yeah, I think it always has been the idea that you can go into this landscape and find things that are hidden or that are mysterious. I love that. Um,
Hmm.
I've been basically doing that all my life as far as like snooping around in the woods and see what you can find out. Watch
I
the
have
animals, the
I
birds.
have the same kind of experience in that when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm and the woods were basically right behind our barn. And so I can't tell you how many hours I spent just going up into the woods for no particular reason other than you know, just to be there and to do something. And you kind of get an observational habit, I guess, where you just start to routinely try to notice stuff. So I can sort of I feel a kinship with that experience.
Good.
Uh,
That's. Would you like me to read one? I can.
yeah, why don't you pick one out and read it to our listeners and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I'm going to read you To the Waterfall in Winter. And here we go. If there is no path, create one. On deer hoof feet, crush leaves, pause while your ears twitch, and you scan the limestone ridge you're following, the black caves listening. Then slide 3 times on leaf hidden stones, and so blunder at last to the waterfall. Sit on a rock so slant that you're leaning over a ledge trickle, a pool of wet chert gravel with oak leaf drain. The water slips, drips, chains, snaps over rock and moss that's the palest of greens, a bobcat's eyes peering through twigs. You may never know what inside you needs healing, but when the cedron lights on the vine at the base of your rock, and you feel every speckle of her feathers, her pine needle feet, her vivid eyes trusting you, you'll trust yourself to climb if you like, as high as the cave up there by the sky where the waterfall starts. a cave too small for your shoulders. But through limestone pierced by rain for how many years, here how the waterfall begins. One drop.
Thank you. That's a lovely poem. That's one of my favorites in this collection. I'm glad you chose that one to read. Um, does it have an origin in an actual experience of yours in a particular waterfall, or is it more your
Absolutely.
imagination?
It's a very shabby waterfall that it's about at the place where Table Rock Lake and it becomes the James River or vice versa. And there's a very messy waterfall there that I fell in love with it. And I go back there all the time. And every time I go, there's some kind of new poem.
Mm.
It's I always tell people, oh, I wrote more waterfall poems again because it's like Monet with his water lilies on a poem basis. I guess I just can't stay away. But
Well, that's good.
it was at a time when um, I don't like talking about myself too much in the poems, I guess, but it was a time when I was feeling sad and like I was making mistakes. And this bird came to me and it got so close and it
Mhm.
trusted me. And so I think the poem is about that trust, um, trusting, knowing that if someone trusts you, maybe you can trust yourself. And I know that's a great theme of your book, Slant of Light. I feel like is who can you trust? Can you trust yourself all the time? And the big answer from the waterfall is yes. You
Mhm.
can trust. Uh,
Yeah.
you can trust. It's something like a gift being held out to me was that little bird. So
Yeah, and and to me, one of the pleasures of the poem is that it's not a grandiose waterfall. That it's something, and you trace it all the way to its beginning, which is just a single drop, and it starts in a tiny cave, a cave that's too small, so it's kind of deliberately working on this small scale. Which is, that's kind of indicative of how insights work, I guess, sometimes.
that's true. That's a good observation about um, the sometimes the small moments are the big ones.
Mhm.
I agree.
Well, and that kind of takes me back to the subject of the Ozarks, which, whatever else you might say about them, is that they're not big. It's not a big landscape in the way that we think of landscapes. And so I don't know if this is true for you, but you find yourself having to focus in on small things. Um, does that make sense?
Yes, it's a landscape. I mean, geologically, you have to go down into it. It was a plateau and then it's eroded. So everything that you're going into is kind of down in. And I like that a lot because there's so many things that are hidden that are still available for you to find. I love like sinkholes. I love things that are like sort of hidden and you might find a sparkly rock at the bottom. Um,
Yeah.
the mystery of that and all the caves that we don't know about. My brother and I found one and he just explored it the other day and it turns out to be beautiful. But
Oh,
who knew? It's not a cave that's on any map and yeah, it's there's always little surprises like that. I think in this kind of groundhoggy landscape.
yeah. It's well suited for burrowing and digging and that sort of thing.
And hiding, yes.
Yeah, little secret places and that sort of landscape where things are tucked away and have to be kind of sought out to be found.
Yeah.
you read another one for us? Have you got another one you'd like to read?
Sure. I'll read you Purchase. This is kind of a very Ozarky poem. To own a bluff, maybe, means you will own a waterfall, a sycamore where dragonflies hunt through leaves, the walnut tree's rainfall harpstrings, and any feathers the heron happens to leave by the river. You could carve a road along the ledges, build a wall of limestone, or you could climb now and then up the waterfall to the seep where squirrels drink. You could watch for the twin fawns, look for spear points, and let soft seeds drift just past your hands.
I'd be interested in hearing your reflections on that poem before I offer any thoughts. So,
Well,
what would you have to offer us on that?
I wrote it for my brother when he bought a bluff above the James River. And to me, this is about what happens or what maybe should happen when you come to buy or live on a piece of land in the Ozarks. You need to find out what's there before you start to change it. And my brother is really good at that. Luckily, he listens and he watches. But we've noticed that the past owner of that land decided to put a road right over the waterfall. And he put the waterfall inside of a plastic tunnel and then ran the road over it. Well, then you wait. And what happens is sometimes the rains are bigger than that guy anticipated and they don't fit in the plastic tunnel. So Doug estimates that in another two rainstorms, it's going to wash out altogether and the waterfall will go back to being a waterfall again with no road at all. But as people come to the Ozarks, I think and we're kind of looking at northern Arkansas going to be a mountain bike mecca, is what I hear. So a lot of people are going to come and they're going to buy land in the Ozarks. And I think my point in writing Purchase is look and listen and find out who came before you, and then think about how you're going to honor that.
Hmm.
Uh, because there's been the first Americans have been here, and they leave you clues about what to do. There's animals and birds that are going to share that land with you and watch them and listen to them. And there's so many stories. You just have to ask the neighbors, and stories last a long time. And they can tell you more about your land and then maybe make some decisions about I'm going to put a road here or I'm going to, that's
Yeah.
my that's my theory in writing it, but it was fun to write.
Yeah. You know, I noticed some connections between it and the To the Waterfall in Winter. Not merely that they're both have waterfalls in them, but they're both in the sort of second person imperative voice, in that you're speaking to a you and
Mhm.
telling the you to, what to do or what you can do. And that is kind of an interesting stance to take, I think. And then also, it seemed like you're kind of a fan of the short line. The poems are composed of basically these kind of three beat lines for the most part, until you want to emphasize something, and then you shorten them up even shorter. I wonder how how do you come to this kind of just I don't want to get too technical here, but how do you arrive at these kinds of ways of expressing?
My son's very good at the formal poetry, and he says they have 2 feet, and that's because that's a good observation. It's because I walk typically the whole time I'm writing, and so it's a walking rhythm, um,
Okay.
and that is how that came about. I I have a notebook with me all the time, and it is waterproof. It has to be. It's waterproof and mudproof. and you can
That's
write it
wise.
with a pencil. It's you can get these anywhere pretty much. Menards has them, but they're they were made for scientists, I think, but they're great for poetry. And you can take them in a kayak with you. But all the time when I'm writing, I am moving through that landscape. Um, if I'm sitting still, then I'm thinking about what is moving. And I think over the years, looking at the poems that go and the poems that I put aside and say, I am never going to send that to the Cave Region Review.
Hmm.
I The ones that with motion in them are the ones that work. Whether a
Okay.
fish is moving, a water is moving, a deer is moving, I'm moving, something's moving. And so that's my great poetry helper that I share with students and stuff is make it move.
Okay. That's interesting. I had not thought about that, but when you said it, it immediately makes sense that there is a kind of a walking rhythm to the poems that you can feel that as the poem moves along. Ah, very interesting. How about one more? Have you got another?
Sure. I'm going to read. Oh, I know I'll read this one. I'm going to read the one called Swallow Hole. I'm near the creek at my own risk, the signs tell me. Banks could collapse into the deep. Currents may take me beyond the reach of hackberry root down the swallow hole, where the creek veers from its safe path to plunge beneath the soft clay bank below my feet, carrying sky, tearing away through coils of stone, pulsing down hollow when it vanishes, making a cave I want to see. And
That's cool.
yeah, I had to go back to the scary place 4 times to get that poem right. I didn't really, there are signs there that say don't go there, but I knew there was a poem there and I was willing to go for it. But I was very relieved when I finally wrote the poem. Yeah,
You know, one of the things I think we all, whatever we're working in, whether it's poetry or prose, um, we have to kind of face the decision as to how elevated to make our language. And you know, your poetry tends to take the route of the common language. You're not grasping for high rhetoric in your poems. You're using the everyday. Um,
yeah,
and I don't know, does that seem to does that sort of fit in with with an aesthetic approach that you take?
absolutely it does. That's partly, oh, my dad's and my idea that simpler language is better as he taught me from young. But in college, I went to Monmouth College in Illinois. And as you know, in Illinois, when you go to college, you go north because that's just what happens. In Illinois, there's a different culture south and north. One of my professors had me go entirely through the poem The Wasteland and look up every single word and see what he was doing, what Eliot was doing. And I had to look for the origin of each word. It was really instructive and important to me because I realized he was going for the Indo-European root words. He was going for rock and not, it wasn't, he wasn't trying to be flowery. He was trying to get back to the the solid word that we all know. And so
Mhm.
that's what I try to do, I think, based on that experience. Not that I want to write like T.S. Eliot, because I don't. I'm much more lyrical, but I like that sense of language as know where a word came from before you use it. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and that I think it's a real it's kind of taking on a challenge in a way in that making everyday language lyrical um, is, we think of that as almost kind of anti-poetic. You think of everyday language as being not the language of poetry, and people, also so often are, sort of grasping or reaching for the unexpected or the unusual word because that sort of um, means poetry to them. You know, um,
Yeah, exactly. But I
whereas,
like, yeah, I I kind of faced a choice at one point in my education. My creative writing professor badly wanted me to go to the University of Iowa and do the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I badly did not want to go because I felt like I had read enough of that poetry to know that it was obscure to me. And when I write, I like it to be pretty direct.
mhm,
I
mhm.
like you to be able to grasp it. And then, like that way, a poem is like a window, and you're on one side and I'm on the other side, and we're both looking and we're both seeing. Um, and you may see slightly different reflections than I do, but we're both seeing the same. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. There's no sort of willful or deliberate obscurity in involved. Yeah.
no, I'm not trying to do that at all. And there are some poems. I've got one here that I'll read it really fast because it's really short, but
Okay. No,
it's um, it's one that you can read into what you want. But uh, yeah, this is called Stray, and it's very short. Wind along the bluff chimes high in the sycamores, wheezes through the slots of caves and the throats of chickadees, stirs the dead asters. Something comes bounding with golden seeds and thorns woven through its fur to rub a cold blue muzzle against my hand and follow me home.
so
So
the
this,
stray is a stray, um, but the wind is also a stray, right? I mean,
there's a and the something that follows you home. Phil Howerton, who's the editor of I'm going to say it wrong, Corner Post Press, says that that something could mean so many things to different people. It could mean the mystery you take home from the woods. It could mean a feeling. It could mean um, some wonderful thing that you're sensing that you can't quite grasp. And when he said this to an audience, his wife, Victoria, who's very funny, was there. And she said, Phil, it's really about her imaginary mountain lion. and and everybody laughed. I had told Victoria that that's what inspired it, but Phil was right. I mean, that poem is an example of you're on one side and I'm on the other side, and we're seeing what we need to see in that poem. Um,
yeah, yeah, seeing a natural phenomenon,
yeah, and not
but
the imaginary mountain lion, which is actually what I wrote the poem about. I pretended my mountain lion was still there and he was following me home.
okay. I like that. I like that idea. Uh, Not necessarily that I would want to encounter a mountain lion out in the woods, but as a metaphor, it works.
If you,
Let's talk a little bit more about the book Follow, um, which, just to remind everybody, it's in there's a link on the comments uh, page. So if you're watching on YouTube after this conversation, look down below and you'll see a purchase link for Follow. Um, it's pretty good sized book of poems. Takes, and you've got it sort of divided into three parts. So,
yeah,
what observations do you have about its overall architecture and its building?
well, in the first place, For some reason, being an English major and taking many creative writing classes, it never occurred to me that I would have to put my poems into any kind of order and make a book. And it would have been an easy enough assignment, take a poem, take a set of poems and put them in an order that makes sense to you. But I never had it. So I'm like, oh, how do I do this? And I fell back on the idea that everybody knows is making a playlist of music. Um, and you know how that makes a kind of an emotional order to it. And I decided to divide it in three sections. And the first section is about trails, and they can be water trails or land trails, and how you kind of follow them and find things. The second part is called field guides, and it may be my favorite because some of the best experiences I've had are meeting people or animals on the trail and see what they can they'll either treat you as the field guide or you can find out from them what you ought to be seeing in this place. Uh, my favorite was a time when some people came up to me and they're like, "What is this thing?" And they were holding out a hedge apple. And so I had to explain to them, like, hedge apples, yes, they are not something we can eat, and the deer aren't crazy about them, but maybe there were mastodons here once in this very place where we're walking, and they're the perfect size for an elephant. So you get these opportunities to kind of riff on what you're seeing and also see how other people are seeing it, other animals. So field guides is my favorite. And the last part is about mysteries. Um, one of my favorite mysterious places is in Shannon County, and it's called Devil's Well. And you look, I don't know if you've been there, but go because you go down into a sinkhole, and then you look deeper still, and there's this blue water. And it is so blue, and it just seems like heaven.
Hmm.
And so you don't kind of have words in your language for this blue. Um, that's one of the more mysterious places in Missouri to me. Definitely worth going and sticking your head down in this place and seeing this blue. It goes on and on. So so I like the third section as well because it kind of gets into the things I can't express about the
Oh,
Missouri wilderness.
okay. And did you have to do a lot of culling and rearranging and
A little
you know?
bit. I
Mhm.
tried to get put one poem to lead into another. So like if it maybe ended with a deer, then I picked up with one that has a deer in it in a different way. And I just kind of got them to lead on that way. And then I really like poems that I call shelve off into mystery. So I
Mhm.
went the book with some of those. You
Yeah,
know how
that seems to be a pattern I've picked up on a lot of your poems is that there's this kind of they're heading in a particular direction and then they take a turn. There's a sort of about a two-thirds turn uh, where they go off in an unexpected direction. That
yeah,
seems to be a kind of a favorite um, method for you or
it's a
a
favorite
thing that
moment
you
of my
do.
life. Yes, and I try to capture it every time. When it's like when you're kayaking or canoeing in the Ozarks and you can see that there's banks for a while and then all of a sudden it goes deeper and into the green or blue whatever color river it is you're following, but it goes obscured, and I really like that moment.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's funny. I'm a kayaker too, and I can always manage those turns. I haven't flipped on a turn like that, and I can't even think when. But the last time I flipped a kayak was on a big lazy stretch of water where I got to daydreaming, and there was a an underwater, a sycamore branch underwater, about that far beneath the surface of the water, and it just flipped me like that. I didn't even see it coming. I was just idly thinking thoughts, and the next thing I knew, I was in the water. So,
That's a poem right there.
right.
That would make a very good poem. You should write it.
I don't know what it signified, but there it is. What's your favorite kayaking stream or float stream?
Usually, we're always out on this the James River, which is
Okay.
where my aunt left me a very old cabin along there. It's washing down the bluff. I mean, it sounds nice to have a cabin, but it's
Hmm.
it's a lot of worry. But it's great to go there and just get your kayak out, and it's a base for me to go, and so it's a bend between Galena and Cape Fear is where I hang out, and there's
Okay.
so many birds, and um, it's I've read old. If you get on the internet, of course, you can find old settlers' stories of that area, which is a ton of fun because you can see how people were living there before you came along, and it's just fun to see what they called places and
Yeah.
yeah,
Was, was that on the Schoolcraft route, or was that
it's
not?
I believe so. I believe he would have come that way. It wouldn't have been quite as back flooded by the lake at that point, but yeah, it's long before you get to Virgin Bluff and those places. So
Okay.
it's still it's got a lot of bluffs and oh boy, are there eagles and it's just
Yeah.
the ideal place.
Uh-huh. So have you got something in the works? Are we do we have poems to look forward to?
Well, I hope so. I sent quite a few to the Cave Region Review, and they're supposed to do something with them. So, but as I write them, I collect them. So
Hmm.
I'm
Good.
hoping that
I'll put a link to Cave Region Review into my comments section too, so people, if you're not familiar with that magazine, you can find it in the comments section.
yes, and
So
send your things to them because they love regional work and they'll read it for you and see what they can help you with. So I really recommend it. The other thing is Wild Muse has a ton of nature poems in it from Missouri and Arkansas poets, both of the Ozarks. And this has just been so delightful to get to know all these poets, these other poets. We're like a family, we're very non competitive. And we
wow,
get together
it's
and swap stories.
it's a wonderful book. I really liked that book when it came out. I'm a big fan of it too, and so that's going on the comments page too. So anybody who watches this video, you got to scroll down and check out the various links that I'm going to be tossing on there. Well,
Yeah.
we're almost out of time, so let me just say thank you so much, Amy. It's been a real pleasure to visit with you.
Well, it's been a delight to finally meet you and see the man behind some of these interesting books that you've written. Truly
Well, thank you, thank
great
you.
reads.
Let me- One final plug here. Amy Wright Vollmar's book of poetry is called Follow. It's published by Corner Post Press, and it's available online at all the usual places. And I'm posting a link at the bottom of the screen. So thank you so much, Amy. It's been great to talk.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
Take
you very
care.
much.
Be,
Thank you.
be good. Bye bye.
Bye.